I'm pleased to welcome Ssjc Coleman, who graduated from the School of Journalism and Communication in 2012. She is currently an Associate Strategy Director at the New York-based ad agency Annex 88.
Yep.
Ssjc, thanks for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So maybe first, for those who may not know, what does a strategist do? I mean, I know Deb Morrison has a great class on strategy, but for those who may not be familiar with the term.
The way I explain it to friends and family who don't quite have a full grasp on, advertising and what I do, I explain it in a way that's try to be a little bit more simple. Like I try to say that strategists help make sure that the ads and the creative and the message is effective to whoever we're trying to talk to and whoever we're trying to reach. So I do a lot of research in kind of the front end of a project to understand what's going on in culture, what's going on with this particular consumer, what's most important to them, what helps drive their decision-making process, and then understanding where the brand comes into it and making sure that the brand has a place to play and how to best communicate whatever I need to for those people. So it's a kind of a mixture of culture, understanding consumer, understanding the brand, and then also understanding what all the competitors are doing to make sure that we're not doing the same thing, that we're able to distinguish ourselves and be different and kind of find our own white space.
Great. So tell us a little bit about your transition from the SOJC into your career. What was your first break and how did you achieve that?
Yeah, so 2012 seems like so long ago. And I got really, really lucky that I had started networking, probably in my junior year, where I knew I was really like gung-ho about being a strategist and kind of being within the strategic field. Made some connections, kept in touch with them throughout my junior and senior year, and had worked on a couple different projects through different classes and kind of on my own, one particularly being for nail polish. And there was an agency, a community manager role at an agency in New York who was looking for a community manager for Maybelline and Essie nail polish. So I kind of had all of these interesting projects that were really relevant for the job at the time. And I had a couple of interviews. I had, a connection there already who could vouch for me, and was able to get a job and kind of go to New York about a week after I graduated, and really use that time it wasn't a traditional like junior strategist role, but I do think that working as a community manager and working in social gave me a really unique opportunity to understand social platforms, understand the digital ecosystem, and look at consumers in a really interesting way that I think sometimes people don't think of. Like I wasn't in a focus group 24/7 when I was interacting with these people in the comments or hearing what they had to say online and focus or on like forums and message boards. And so it was kind of a way for me to pick up on trends, pick up on what things were swaying their decisions, and then bring that to the table and say, here's what matters most to these people. Here's some ideas on how we can change content or talk to them in a certain way for different campaigns.
Mm-hmm. Say a little bit more about networking, because I think that can be intimidating, and also during the present, everyone being kind of confined to being talking in the way that we're talking via Zoom, difficult. So what would be your advice for?
Yeah, I'm a really big advocate of Twitter. I think Twitter is a really easy and kind of low barrier to entry way to get to know people and talk with people in a way that doesn't feel like you're invading their space or their time or kind of being a really like eager person that just wants a job. I think I was able to, back in 2012, and I still do it now, just make connections that way where I follow them, see what they talk about, talk to them a little bit more about what their interests are. And not necessarily has to be advertising specific. It could just be about TV shows or cooking or whatever. And I think that adds a different kind of human element that people will appreciate. And then as, you know, time goes on, you realize, you know, maybe they work at the agency you're interested in, or they know someone, and, you know, you slide into their DMs and you could say, hey, you know, you mentioned this before, or you posted about this, or I see that you know this person. Could you tell me a little bit more? And I think it's a little bit of an easier way to make introductions and conversation in a way that doesn't feel as forced. I do think there, of course, is benefit to, you know, platforms like LinkedIn and tapping the connections that you already have and made. I think, you know, looking at the Oregon network, it's incredible how it's grown exponentially over the years. And I just, you know, if there's ever anyone that I'm interested in, or an agency that I'm interested in, there's for sure someone who knows someone within this Oregon network that knows them. And I think that the generosity of this network is really impressive. And I believe that if you reach out to anyone, they'll offer you advice, they'll offer you a connection, or put you in touch with who you need to. It's not always easy as they can, you know, get you a job, but I think that they can pass along what they've known and what they've experienced in a way that can help be beneficial.
Mm-hmm. What would you tell your younger self that was still a student? What do you know? In other words, what do you know now that you didn't know then?
Yeah, I think something I've thought about a lot over the years is I needed to stop comparing myself and to other people, to my peers, and to what other people's career trajectories. I think it can get really competitive, and I think obviously everyone has the same end goal of finding a job and you know, going on to the next level. But I do think that there's a benefit into your own unique path. For example, when I wanted to do strategy, but this community manager job presented itself, and for a while I, you know, contemplated whether that was the right move. But at the end of the day, I believe that decision to get my foot in the door, to learn a different skill set that still had strategic legs, was really beneficial for me and helped differentiate me from other people as well. And I think that even after that, I would get really hung up, or, you know, put a lot of pressure on myself that I wasn't promoted at the same time someone else was, or that, you know, maybe my path looked different than someone else's. And I just think that pressure is unnecessary, and you shouldn't put that on yourself. And I think as long as you're taking advantage of opportunities and you're learning everything that you can, and never saying no to learning. There have been a lot of times where there have been educational opportunities within agencies, or my boss has said, hey, I'm, you know, learning a little bit more about comms planning. Do you want to come and learn with me? Even though that's not in my job description, I took advantage of that and learned a lot, and able to infuse different elements of this discipline and this way of thinking into what I'm doing in the day-to-day. And I just think that you can't always take advantage of the learning opportunities. And I think they help make you interesting and make you unique, and you can bring those to the table in a way that someone else might not.
Mm-hmm. Working from home right now can be very isolating. Any suggestions just to how to keep your spirits high and keep motivated?
Yeah, I think for me, what has helped me, you know, my own mental health and helped me stay interested in everything and kind of dedicated to work is, one, making sure that I have a consistent exercise routine of some sort. I really think that moving my body, I used to, you know, walk around New York all the time, and now I probably get like 2,000 steps in a day if I don't leave my apartment. So I think that even getting my heart rate up and taking a walk outside, or just changing my perspective of where I am, is really important. I think also setting like limits for myself on, you know, the work day, and when I give myself time to like give my brain a break. I try and block time off on my calendar for, you know, my morning catch up, where it's, you know, catching up on emails and everything that I need to kind of organize myself for the day. I make sure I take time for lunch, and then as best as I can have an endpoint of my day. And I think that some people have said that this is not just working from home, this is living at work. And I think that there's a bit of truth to that. Like, it feels like if you don't set those limits and guardrails for yourself, it's going to constantly feel like the wheels are turning in your head. And I know I felt that way. And so it's been really beneficial for me to say, like, okay, I'm logging off at 6, and I'm going to take that time to go on a walk, or I'm going to watch a different TV show that just gives my brain a break, or I'm going to, cook, do something that makes me feel like there's an end point to the day. And I think that's helped me get through everything in a way that doesn't feel so like overwhelming.
That's great advice. I want to open it up and introduce Kara Ibsen, who's a current student at the SOJC, and Kara also oversees a group called After Hours, which she can tell you about and tell you about her interests. So welcome, Kara.
Yeah, hello. Ed, thank you so much for setting this up. And Chelsea, it's so nice to virtually meet you. So I'm going into my senior year at U of O. After Hours has been probably the most prominent thing I've worked at in the SOJC so far. For all of last year and going into this year, I've been the executive director. So it's just been managing this awesome team with this common goal of really trying to find mentorship for people within the SOJC. So what we do is we have weekly workshops through spring term when we were remote. It was all through Zoom, but in a typical sort of time, we would have people come into the classroom and host workshops that way. And it was really awesome. And even before I joined After Hours, the way that I started to like snowball into finding connections and networking was through After Hours. So I was in this workshop where I met Emily Pearson, who I don't know if you ever met Emily. Yeah, she was executive directing, and I sat down with her and I was like, what do I do next? What's the next steps here? So I hope to be that for people in the role that I'm in. So that's a little bit about After Hours, but sort of my goal within the SOJC right now is to find my way into the ad world and look into art direction. But I'm so intrigued by strategy, and I know that it comes into literally every position. So yeah, and I wasn't totally sure what the formatting is for this, so I've heard a few questions, but Ed, I'll toss it back to you.
Yeah, no, go ahead and ask a couple of questions.
Okay, cool. So Chelsea, the first thing I wanted to know was, what was the biggest parallel that you found between the SOJC and the industry? And then secondly, what is something that you felt like you had to teach yourself once you got into the real world, something that you picked up after college that wasn't something that you heard that was talked about a lot in your school days?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think this might answer both of your questions at the same time, but something that
let's do it.
Yeah, something that when I reflect back on my time at Oregon and kind of going into the working world, I believed that Oregon did a really great job of instilling a way of thinking and a way of approaching problems, and kind of establishing a set of values that in the type of work you want to create. And so it was really great to see those skills translated when I'm thinking about how advertising and how marketing can affect people, how it can help change perceptions, how it can play a role in people's lives, and making sure that the role benefits them in some way. And it's just constantly, yes, you have to sell a product at the end of the day, but making sure that you're doing so in a way that has a purpose to it.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's not always something that's taught in other portfolio schools. I think that they do a really great job of, I don't know, they do a job of like showing like, this is a formal brief and this is how you do it, and X, Y, Z, and we get that at Oregon, but it's just, no two briefs I've ever written have ever been the same. They might have a similar template and they might have similar components that go into it, but it's never been the same. There's always changes that you have to make, and you always have to be able to agile and pivot. And I think that Oregon's done a really great job at giving me the tools to pivot and to be agile and to think outside the box and not feel constrained by the traditional, guardrails that briefs or decks or templates or campaign structures have given you. And I think now more than ever, being able to break out of those traditional structures is really important, because campaigns aren't going to look the same anymore. The way we're going to reach people is not going to look the same anymore, or things are going to be deprioritized. And so I think that there's a level of flexibility and thinking on your feet that I think Oregon does a really great job of teaching and showing. And that has been one of the biggest takeaways and one of the biggest points of value I've seen coming out of the J school.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great segue into the next thing I was going to ask. So I read that you did an interview last year with the SOJC. They sort of asked you some questions as an alumni.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned, they asked you a bit about how the industry was changing, and you mentioned that it's going through some growing pains at the time. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just interesting a year later to look back at that question and just the industry now and how crazy things have gotten. So where would you say those growing pains are now, 1 year later? Being asked that question the second time.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think what this time has done has just sped up a lot of those changes. I think they were all kind of in the making. Like, I mean, you can read this in any think piece, but like the move to digital, the move towards the platforms and the types of actual content people are making is increasingly
Mm-hmm.
Being more created in the palm of your hand. But I also think that there were so many cracks in the way things had been done in the past, and how groups of people were represented and the types of people who were working on projects. And I think that through this pandemic, it has just sped up how that needs to change. And I think through the Black Lives Matter movement, it has just put a huge spotlight on the problems within the industry and how it needs to change, and how it's unacceptable to not make those changes, I think. And I think the industry sometimes moves slowly. There was a really interesting tweet yesterday from a prominent, I guess, strategic thinker, and he had created this slide that shows like, oh, this old way of thinking, here were the people that you should, where you used to follow. These were the most important people in advertising. And he said, these are new most important people in advertising. And it was all white men across the board. And it was just kind of infuriating for me at that moment, where you think you're making so much progress in the industry, all the conversations that are happening, and you still see choices like that being made. Mm-hmm. And I just think that it's lazy and uninformed to say that these are the most important voices within the industry right now, because it's so diverse. And I think bringing in new types of creative thinking, new voices, new experiences is just what we need. And I think we're slowly getting there. It's just going to take a little bit more pushing. And then I think that going back to the values that Oregon teaches and instills, it's like, I've, not to pat myself on the back, but these are things that we've been talking about and thinking about for years. And it's nice to see the industry catching up. But I think that Oregon has put out really smart thinkers and voices that have been pushing for this change all along. And now it's good to see that people are catching up to that. Yeah, totally.
Ed, do you have something?
No, well, I just wanted to kind of wrap up because we tried to keep them to about 20 minutes, but I invite you two to connect maybe offline. And I just want to really thank you, Ssjc, for being generous with your time and,
of course,
and your insights. And we will see you soon. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much.
We'll connect later.
Bye.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Bye.